That this is going to matter because it already functions the way that it does, but I think it's interesting to know that what people are doing, I guess, call them out, I do think that it's been functional. So in one thing, I feel like some of the change doesn't occur, the deeply entrenched change, because people sell themselves over to the false story that the media allows, the framework that the media allows to be told, which is exploiting. Take, for instance, these likenesses that instead of looking at the system, they deflect it from the system, and then they pin it on various ones that they surveil and don't know what's going on. And then they use mechanisms from outside forces, whether it be media or other mechanisms, to make likenesses and frameworks. And then they channel people into fighting those battles, pinned on certain groups and certain people. That is a deflecting tool, right? And then they manufacture those, and it just seems very manipulative and exploitative and a branch of abuse. And so then it undermines any politicians and different ones utilizing that exploitative abuse and then using it to... So it kind of feels like, to me... So the reason why I think about the Hunger Games and whatnot, which the Hunger Games isn't just about food, it's about the outside force, the systemic force, the dominating force outside, and then the walls that close people in and then pin those groups against each other to force them to fight, or whatever. And in that they fight doesn't free them, right? It just allows them to survive a little bit longer than the next person, so they're forced to fight, da-da-da-da-da. In some ways, it's like that. It's as though the politicians are trying to moralize themselves as they stand on the outsides of the wall. And they're like sitting next to Netanyahu and sitting next to all these other establishment people, right? And they're looking at a situation that they helped exacerbate, and then they fund to exacerbate. And they're trying to pretend as though they're moralizing their argument so that they can diagnose the issue. And so they're like priding themselves on, let's diagnose the issue, whereas they're the issue, right? The way that the system is framed is creating these problems, but they don't look all the way into like how it follows through to them and what they're doing and geopolitically. So they moralize their argument and they look to their constituents to say, because they want to feel better about themselves, right? And then they justify the investments that they've made with, whether it be the media apparatuses or these like various ones, and they have them go in, infiltrate and instigate these situations and invest on how to keep the experiment going against various ones. And then every time somebody's stuck in the framework that they're referencing, so they're intentionally referencing it on the people that they have as this abuse narrative, this exploitative surveillance, these false likenesses. And because they know with human behavior that people will deflect, so people that are trapped in the system, to survive, they'll have to deflect on different ones and whatnot. And so they don't know how to, they're not really doing the larger transformative work. And so they're trying to piece people apart, and they're trying to make them tear each other apart. And then they're priding themselves on playing God. And then they draw it back to themselves as like these politicians or these people, knowing very well that the thing they can't change is the thing sitting right next to them outside the walls, outside these barriers that they're manufacturing. And so they just try to save face and say everybody else is, the one that is causing it. They then start recruiting people to play along with them and see them as peace and see them as like, look, you'll be alleviated from this tension we've inflicted on you if you just eventually side with us. And so then they say outside these barriers is siding with them and the relief of it. And then they moralize their argument. And then they shake hands with their constituents. And then they say, look how we've alleviated this quote unquote problem. So this example that I'm giving is why a lot of it systemically all the way down is a problem. They falsify what peace is. So they've all like kind of given their nod, wink, wink to those outside the boundaries. They basically, they never really critique them. They look to them as this is the mechanism of what is bringing peace. They literally, in their behavior, act like they're bringing peace. They moralize it against each other by creating these different party lines, but it follows back geopolitically to the investments they get, whether with Israel and the major investments that they get with Israel, the actors and various ones that give their nod, wink, to moralize it. And then they keep framing the emphasis on different ones that they choose to put the emphasis on through false surveillance, through abuse, and all of these things that they refuse to call out because they like the benefits that they get from the corrupt, dominant system. And because the more they intensify the different sides stuck in this echo chamber or stuck in this false framework, intentional barriers and sanctions to intensify these conflicts, they look at it as it moralizes them. Look at them struggling. Look at the pressure we've placed on them. Look at how the surveillance has caused this, that, and the other, and these conflicts and whatnot. They don't even budge on correcting those measures or calling them out. They actually seem to, in practice, like them, because deep down it seems like to them this is how to get rid of the problems. These are the problem people. They need the state mechanism to do this. And so in practice, that's what they tend to believe. And that's why they never really get very far deep down with the actual understanding of life, with actual liberation, with a felt spirit of actual reform, because they're right in bed with the dominant corrupt system. If they don't even want to investigate following it through on the apparatuses that they make it palpable, because the system lets them have space between what they say and who invests in what's the power behind what they're trying to moralize and do, whether it be who's investing in this power structure, who's causing these problems, who's abusing various ones and sanctioning them and putting these pressures on them. They don't want to look at that. And so they get fed these stories by different ones, the propagandists that tell them, so that you're not going to be put in this position or abused in this way, or have to have all of this stirred up against you and whatnot. Because you don't want to look wrong. You don't want to be put in that position, do you? You like the moralizing cloak that we've given you, and deep down the various ones that are abusing various ones, but to you, it's just the scale just tips to the dominant system has better peace. It's more orderly. You just have to turn a blind eye to what's investing it geopolitically, how it goes all the way down, and pretend that you're actually saving various ones. But you've just made a deal with the devil to switch pressure so that pressure will be deflected on other people and relieved from you if you just go along with what the devil wants, right? The system, the framework, and whatnot. And in practice, that just seems as far as you can go, and why it never really seems like freedom. And in practice, it's as though you're covering yourself because you're like, I don't want to be abused like them. And I know very well that this is a system abusing them and causing this to happen. And we're just going to moralize it, though. As I was saying, we're just going to pretend like those stuck in this system and this false framework and the false sides that it produces is the actual issue, or like heading the problem, or whatever. Whereas that you're heading the problem and you're deflecting it and saying that it's over there and piecing various ones apart, right? And then you're channeling the conversation to go into diagnosing the problem or diagnosing how these people need to do this, that, and the other. And when you know very well you've never given them the chance to do that, because you need to keep inflicting the problem to place the focus so that the actual problem of the systemic barriers and this exploitation and surveillance and the mechanisms and the investment of which serve what you're actually doing that don't really serve people creates these stories where then you create this false saviorism and ever letting it be about what it was actually about. And so then you told them and convinced them that if they just make a deal with the dominant system, that's what peace is. And so everyone started to get a little bit of an investment from the forces outside, and then funded to go in and cloak themselves in these things and pretend like they're saving various ones through parading around with these options to just side with the dominant system, and that's all they have to do so that they can be more moral and saved and whatnot. Whereas it's a false, corrupted sense of a false saviorism and a false separation of it, and creating the problem so that you can seem as though you're pulling people outside the bounds to resolve it, which the whole thing just seems corrupt.